Hi and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a fabulous day. Today we'll be making string art cards. You may have seen string art on home decor or signs or other projects like that, but today we're going to translate that into paper crafts. So I'm going to start off with these dies that punch a bunch of holes in different shapes. I'm going to use my brad setting tool here to punch out the pieces that didn't punch all the way through with my manual die cutting machine. The first pattern we're going to do is a clock pattern, or at least what I like to call a clock pattern. So we're going to tape off one end of the embroidery floss, and we're going to start at the 12 o'clock position. And we're going to pull that all the way through, and then we're going to go and line up our floss so it's directly beneath the 12 o'clock at 6 o'clock. And I highly recommend using a grid mat to line this up, or even a T-ruler or any kind of ruler to get this lined up as straight as possible. And then we're going to go and pierce that through the 6 o'clock position. And we're going to pull the floss, and then we're going to go to the 11 o'clock, and then we're going to go to the 5 o'clock. So we're going counterclockwise for my card. You can also go clockwise if you want, but for this card I just decided to go counterclockwise. And we're going to repeat those steps back and forth until we go all the way around the circle and cover the entire empty space. I highly recommend getting a thicker cardstock if you're going to do these kinds of projects, because it'll reduce the amount of buckling on your card. You want to make sure you get every circle looped, so this effect is really as pretty as possible. And don't worry about cutting a string that is too short. I'll show you what to do in the next step. You don't need to cut a piece of string that is miles and miles long, okay? Because we're not Stretch Armstrong here. So when your string or your embroidery floss does not complete your project, all you have to do is cut it off and then tape it to your project, tape it to the back of your project, and then just thread another piece of string. Just rethread another piece of string. Just, thread the string. I'll be back. And now that we've got our floss rethreaded, we're just going to pick up where we left off and continue the process. Once your project is complete, you're going to cut off the excess and just use some really strong adhesive and tape that down. As you can see, my first loop is not consistent with the rest of my loops. It's crooked and it's ruining the effect. So I'm just going to carefully peel that tape off, and I'm going to use a tool to just fish that string out of there. And then just cut off the excess again and tape it down. I'll show you that process again with another rogue loop. So I'm just peeling off the piece of tape that was originally stuck to it, fishing it out with your finger or a piercer, cutting off the excess, and then just retaping it down so that your card looks nice and pretty and even and spectacular. The next technique is for those that don't want to bother with keeping things even. It's a much more abstract look. So what you want to do is, once you have your shape of little dots, you're just going to loop your string through and just do it willy-nilly. I mean, there really are no rules in this method. I mean, the first technique didn't take that long. It probably took maybe about 10-15 minutes or so. And so this technique would probably take even shorter, because you're not really going along in a certain pattern. The only thing I would recommend is to make sure that all your circles are looped and to crisscross a few times so it's somewhat even, as in the surface of your string art is even. So here's a comparison of the two. Next, we're going to take this, I guess you would call it like a notch die, or at least that's what I'm calling it. And I have my 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 square, and I'm just going to line up this die on the edge of each of those 4 sides. And we're going to do a different kind of string art where I'm not piercing anything through. I'm going to be looping the string on these notches, and you'll see in a second here what I mean. So you're going to take one end of your floss and tape it to the back. Then you're going to loop it on the first notch of the top side of the square, and then bring it to the top notch on the, we'll call it the right side of the square. And then we'll go back to the second notch on the top side, and then to the second notch on the right side, and the third notch on the top side, and the third notch on the right side. And what you get after you repeat this process a couple times is this really cool, like, vortex effects. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. I'm sure scientists or mathematicians would know, but I'm just calling it vortex because it sounds, I don't know, sciencey. What's great about this technique is that you really don't waste any floss. You know what I mean? You just keep going and just pulling string off that card, and whatever you don't use, you just cut off. You're not really wasting anything. Next, you'll just tape off that end, and if you want, you can add another piece of really strong double-sided adhesive to your webbing to make sure it's really secure. And I'm going to take the painter's tape off and replace it with the strong adhesive because I really want this thing to stay put. So next, I'm just going to go around my square and add these other pretty green colors, and once I'm taping off the end of my last section here, I'll be ready to move on to the next step. This technique is also great for young kids to do because there's no needles involved. This next card ended up being my favorite. I just wanted to show you what I did in preparation for it. So I used a rectangle die of dots and a heart die of dots, and then I divided my card into eighths so I could use 8 different colors to make a rainbow. We'll come back to that card in a little bit. I'm using my stamp positioner to line up my sentiment. I'm going to stamp that with some fast drying dye ink. Swing the door over and press down really hard because I do not want to mess this up at this point. And of course it comes out great with the help of my positioner. I'm going to take this out and attach it to a note card. But first, you want to add some foam tape to the back. As you can see, the sides now have some raised dimension, so adding the foam tape in the middle will help make the card front the surface a little more level, if you know what I mean. And once that's done, you can admire your great work. Going back to the first card now, I'm going to stamp my sentiment in some silver shimmer ink. Mainly because I didn't want to break out all the heat embossing supplies. I love heat embossing, but man, it's too noisy. Anyway, I have this unicorn stamp and die set that I colored in with my Copics, and with some good strong double-sided adhesive, I'm going to stick that onto that bump that my pattern created. Then I'm going to stick the same double-sided adhesive on the back. I'm going to attach some foam tape all along the back as well, again to make my surface as level as possible when I add it to my note card. For some added fun, I decided to use my purple glittery cardstock to match my unicorn, and this card is almost done. We'll move on to the second card I made, which was the abstract silver circle, and I'm pretty sure you guys are wondering like why the heck I decided to make that off center and not in the middle. Well, I wanted to create a moon with my card. Here I did do the heat embossing because I used dark cardstock, and heat embossing just looks better on dark cardstock. And then I added some silver cardstock to the back of my moon for some added sparkle. Now, my holy grail card. Oh my gosh, I had so much fun making this card. Like I said, I divided it to eighths and went into the living room, pulled up an episode of This Is Us, and just did my loops in rainbow order. And the result is absolutely fantastic. I mean, angels are singing. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to give this card away. I think this one's a keeper. It's more than a keeper. I think it's a framer. I'm going to put some foam tape on the back of my heat embossed sentiment, and this card is fabulous. Let's bring back the angels. And we're back. So next, I'm going to finish up the unicorn card by adding some sparkle, some gems to it. And I want to show you this cool tool. So an ad came up on my Facebook newsfeed about diamond painting, and they were using this little stick. So I thought it would be perfect to use for sequins. And so that's what I used there. And then for my moon card, I have this really cool gel pen that creates little sparkles. So I decided to use that gel pen and just make sparkles or stars all over my card. It has a little moonlight on it. I forget what brand that is. But I thought this was an easy way to add some no mess sparkles that actually appear on dark cardstock. Once that's complete, you can really see the amount of shine this card gets when it hits the light just right. And here are all of the string art cards. The supplies I use are listed in the description box as well as on my blog. And if you feel so kind, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thanks!